What's up, everybody? And with Silo 3 getting ready to come out in a few weeks, I thought this was a good time to go ahead and dive into this paranoia-inducing, sometimes claustrophobic, and it is sometimes also a masterpiece as well. And it's over on Apple TV. Now, if you know me, you know I love a good dystopian sci-fi thriller, and this show has all of those vibes and even has a little drama and some crime thriller in there. It gives you a little bit of everything. So before we get into the recap and the breakdown, let me set the stage here for what we're going to be dealing with. Now, imagine this. Your life, your history, your literal right to reproduce is all controlled and micromanaged by a homicidal IT department. And then just when you think you've escaped this underground, silo that basically looks like a big Pringles can underground, you now realize that the outside world really isn't much better. It's a toxic wasteland with poison air. And then you look around and there are 50 more silos just surrounding you. So a better way to put this show is, this is what happens when a toxic HOA is put in charge of the apocalypse. We're basically talking about 2 seasons of lies, secret gas chambers, middle management, dictators having this existential breakdown of sorts. And then if you saw the season 2 finale, it basically ripped the rug right from under us, especially those who haven't read any of the books. And right when we thought everything couldn't get any crazier, we hear this computer voice who is choosing this stay-at-home mom, Camille, to basically be the next person in charge of this silo. So if you thought that was a lot, wait till you get the recap and the breakdown, because I'm going to let you know all the key pieces to both seasons going into season 3. And then we're going to talk about those little nuggets and hidden clues that they have sitting out there in front of us. And we're going to talk about basically this glorious nightmare that we're about to head into in season 3. But real quick, before we get into anything, this is a massive spoiler warning. We're going to be talking full spoilers about everything that happens in season 1 and 2, at least all of the important stuff. So it's basically going to ruin both seasons if you haven't watched it. And I'm also going to give some heavy lore spoilers. That way we can kind of all be, caught up on what's really going on at the end of season 2. And that's basically through the end of the book Shift, which is the second book. If you aren't caught up yet, just go ahead and hit pause or put me in the save for later. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button as well, because it helps me keep making videos like these. And, just come back later and check it out, and then we'll all check out Silo Season 3 together. So let's go ahead and get everyone fully caught up on this timeline, because trying to keep track of all the bodies that have dropped in this show is a little bit hard. So we're going to take our time and get through all of this together. So we start in season 1, and Silo 18 is a 144-story doomsday bunker where 10,000 people or more, something like that, where everybody down there basically lives under this strict borderline religious set of rules. That's basically what they are, called the Pact. Now, where we are when we open this show, nobody knows who built this place, and asking questions, especially the wrong ones that they don't want you to know, can get you sent outside to go clean. And for those who need a refresher in the show, cleaning is basically when they send you outside to go clean the lens and, make everybody think there's some hope, because all the citizens see you cleaning this, high definition lens so they can see the outside world. And then lo and behold, the person who goes out to clean eventually chokes on toxic gas and they die. So the first domino to fall in season 1 starts with the IT worker named Allison and her husband, Sheriff Becker. So they realize that the medical department is secretly gaslighting everybody in the silo, and the doctors are secretly leaving the birth control inside of the women, basically giving them this false hope that they can have kids when they really can't. And the reason they're doing this is because they have this fertility lottery, and that is basically a big sham that is used to keep everybody quiet and make everybody think that, getting pregnant is by chance when it really isn't. And it's all controlled by the doctors and the people of the silo. Well, I shouldn't say the people of the silo, but, the big wigs of the silo. So after this happens, she's obviously probably distraught, and she eventually decodes this secret hard drive. She sees this lush green earth, and she eventually snaps and she demands to go outside, which is a no-no. You never ask to go outside. But when she does go outside because they grant her wish, she basically dies on camera. So then we go 2 years later, where we have the sheriff who is investigating the murder of this relic collector named George Wilkins. So in this investigation, he finds out, or he discovers rather, that his wife was right all along about this hard drive and what she saw on it. So after finding out about this massive cover-up, he decides to join his wife outside, and he dies too. But before he actually goes outside, he actually pulls the ultimate wild card, and he chooses his successor to, being the sheriff. So he secretly appoints George's girlfriend, Juliette, who we follow throughout the season. And she is now the sheriff, and she comes from deep down in mechanical. Now, I will say Juliette taking the badge is probably where everything starts to go a little bit haywire. And the reason I say that is because everything, all of her skills are, built for mechanical, and that was her life. Now she's the sheriff all of a sudden, and she basically uses all of her skills the same way, basically brute force. While she is very smart and she's intuitive, she does tend to use brute force at times because, that's just her basic instinct. But her basic motivation in the beginning is to, solve the murder of George, and she wants to find out who killed George. And this basically leads her to realize that the entire government and the system that they have that's running them is a complete sham. Judicial, who is being ran by Robert Sims, and it's this guy who decides he needs to walk around in a black leather coat underground. And I'm not sure why he wants to be in the Matrix so bad, or maybe that's the last movie he saw before all of this happened. So he thought it would be cool to be underground since he's the head of a department in a black leather jacket. But all of that aside, he's running basically a shadow police force. Now, going over to Sims and the shadow police force for a second, they assassinate the actual mayor, Mayor Johns, and her deputy Mars by giving them poison water. And that was basically all done so they could force their own little puppet into control as the sheriff. And that is where Paul Billings comes into play. But long story short, Juliette eventually outmaneuvers everybody, and she learns that Paul has this degenerative condition that they call the syndrome. He has the shakes, basically. And she also uncovers what they call the Flame Keepers. And they were a secret society of rebels who Judicial secretly medicated just to erase human history. And she also uncovers along the way the ultimate violation, which there are cameras behind every single mirror in the silo. Now, getting into the climax of season 1 is where Juliette finds George's hard drive, and she sees the lush green earth and all that stuff as well. But now by this time, she's been hunted down by Bernard, who is the head of IT, who we also learn is the actual big bad of the show. And he's the one who is, controlling everything and moving their chess pieces around like everybody is a puppet. So they eventually catch Juliette, obviously, and Bernard sentences Juliette to clean, and he sends her outside because now he thinks that he has her in his trap, and, she's going to die with the things that she knows. But they ultimately fool everybody. Bernard honestly kind of underestimates Juliette's connection to mechanical and the family environment that they have, because Juliette's mentor, Martha Walker, cashes in, a favor to supply to get a different type of tape for the hazard suits, because I guess they were using this cheap tape on the hazard suits that eventually the poison got through and everybody that walks outside dies. And the favor was to get the good duct tape. And with getting that, they were able to switch that out with the bad tape and basically help Juliette stay alive. Now, when Juliette does step outside, she realizes that the beautiful green landscape and the blue sky is all basically bullshit. The green earth that everybody sees and the blue skies and all of that when they step outside is basically all an illusion to make people want to go step outside to clean. But because Juliette, switched out the tape, like I said, she survives the poison. She walks past the camera and she eventually sees what the reality actually is. And that reality is the earth is actually dead. And the only thing that she sees out there are a bunch of different circles in the ground, which are the other silos. And where the hell did they come from? How many other silos are there? These were the questions I were asking after season 1 was over. I'm just like, wow, so there are more people. They aren't the only ones. And at this time, I wasn't familiar with any of the material from the book, so I went into this blind. So this was like a big, crazy thing to me. I'm like, wow, this is a huge world, because she's obviously going to go into one of these silos. I didn't know how she was going to get into one, but we're going to get into that now here when we talk about season 2. And season 2, in my opinion, was what I would call complete unhinged chaos, because this season actually moved along pretty quickly, because it starts out with Juliette breaking into Silo 17. Remember, she was in Silo 18. So she breaks into Silo, which is basically this watery graveyard because they had a rebellion there before. And basically everybody died when the poison air got in. But she meets this guy named Jimmy, aka Solo, and he's been living here by himself all these years behind the walls of IT, I believe it was, and he's been in complete isolation. Imagine Tom Hanks in Castaways, but with even more severe PTSD. And in my opinion, there's a lot of fluff in the beginning with the interactions between Juliette and Solo, so I'm not going to talk too much about that, but what I will go into is, while she's down there basically on her post-apocalyptic scavenger hunt, She learns about the safeguard, which is a hidden pipeline on level 14, which is filled with poison gas and is basically used to kill everybody in the silo if they were ever to attempt a rebellion. So yeah, somebody who's ever in control, and we'll get into that later, is willing to, exterminate this entire population if they ever try to rebel. And that makes us think about Silo 18 in this scenario, because after season 1, you kind of saw the tensions rising. And in season 2, the tensions rise even more because Mechanical eventually launches this violent uprising. And it's led by Knox and Shirley and a few others. And it's all basically because everybody saw Juliette go out. They saw her walk past the camera and, they think she's still alive and they're pretty pissed off about it. Then we have Bernard scrambling as well because, everybody in the silo for the most part saw Juliette walk past his camera and now he's going to have to do major damage control to try to explain, the outside isn't good, but now everybody may think that it's good because everybody saw her do what she did. This is kind of where Lucas Kyle comes into play because he's the guy who was, drawing the stars in season 1 and he was helping Juliette. So at one point he gets banished for helping Juliette. Then he eventually comes back and he basically turns into Bernard's shadow and, he's now in the deepest parts of the IT department. And down there is where things get a little bit more interesting because Lucas actually starts to discover the history of the world. And in that discovery, he basically realizes that Bernard and all the other IT people are basically just glorified middle managers. And of course, they're answering to somebody higher up. And he eventually gets this warning back to Bernard. And Bernard is spooked by this. So sifting through all of the chaos that happens through the season, everything leads to the season finale. So the season finale, in my opinion, really hit maximum overdrive, but it also kind of shattered all of at least my expectations of everything that I thought that I knew. Because we see Robert Sims, his wife Camille, and their son eventually all go down to the very bottom of the silo that we've seen a couple other times throughout the seasons. And they get met with this voice from this computer generated IT thing, but it's this mysterious AI called the algorithm. And after it speaks to them because it knows who they are, Robert steps up with his chest poked out, basically telling it that he wants to be in charge. Because deep down, I actually do think that he wants to save the silo, but the algorithm has something else in mind in this case. The algorithm basically kicked Robert and his son out of the room, and it chose Camille, his wife, to be the next head of the silo and the person to be in charge. And she's not a terrible person to pick because, as we saw in season 2 especially, she's good at working the background, politics, and making deals and making things happen. So she has a knack for this type of thing of, doing a little puppeteer thing. But now that Camille is the new head of IT, we have to go back and talk about Bernard because his entire world is basically collapsing right in front of his face at this point. He realized that his life work as Silo 18's protector is basically nothing, and that he was actually being manipulated as well when he thought he was the one doing the manipulate. So at this point, he's completely broken. He doesn't care about anything. He goes and throws on the hazard suit, and he's getting ready to step outside because he wants it to be over. So he does go outside, and to his surprise, he sees Juliette. She has made her way from Silo 17 back to Silo 18 because she wants to warn them about the poison gas and everything that's on level 14. So, they don't rebel and basically everybody gets killed anyways. So the season ends with Juliette and Bernard trapped inside the airlock and we see the fire, and immediately following that we get this flashback to 2049 Washington DC, and we see the world is regular and everything is just normal as it could be. And we see a young Congressman Daniel giving a reporter named Helen a duck pez dispenser right before the world goes up in flames. Now that's where we're going to stop the recap because that's basically where season 2 ends. Well, not basically, that's where season 2 ends. But let's take a second to go ahead and read in between some of these lines and talk about some of these hidden clues and theories that are happening in the background. So the first thing we need to dissect is that flashback from 2049 in Washington, D.C., and how the founders basically set the world on fire. This scene, in my opinion, is the skeleton key for the entire series because it's going to completely shift the genre. And this is yet another show to kind of do this to us, shift genres right in the middle. And I don't hate it, especially because I think the way this show is going to go, I think it's going to go back and forth, obviously, especially from knowing some of the book material. It's definitely going to shift back and forth because while we were getting this futuristic sci-fi survival story, now in season 3, we're probably going to get a little bit of that bureaucratic, government conspiracy thriller. And we're going to find out that the apocalypse was basically a engineered event. The lore from the Shift book, and while I mentioned this was a book series, the first 2 seasons were based on the first book, Wool. But the lore is now shifting to the second book, Shift. And while the show isn't keeping everything the same from the books, they are changing things because Robert Sims shouldn't even really be alive this long if that's the case. But so the show is changing things for their own narrative there, but they are kind of following the book to a degree. So pulling from the material tells us that the scientists invented medical nanobots that they weaponized as this organic life form. And it was all to save humanity from this rogue threat of whatever they deemed to be a rogue threat. When the real rogue threat was a group of American politicians who decided to detonate nuclear bombs and force people underground into these silos because they decided to launch the nanobots and they had to get underground before basically everything was destroyed. Now that duck pest dispenser that Daniel gives to Helen, that is the exact same forbidden relic that Juliette later destroys to hide the hard drive. And I forgot to mention that Helen is a direct ancestor to George Wilkins, who we'll get to in a minute. So the founders didn't really just trap random people. Some of them were probably random, but they all weren't random. I think some of these silos, especially Silo 1, are curated populations. Because while everybody else all of this time was, underground and living through all of these 300 whatever years, in Silo 1, everybody was over there in a cryogenic sleep, taking a nap and getting woken up in shifts, which, kind of leans into the title of the book, Shift. So this revelation from the book explains, in my opinion, the end of season 2 and the algorithm, and that the voice that comes from the algorithm isn't this, AI voice, is actually one of the politicians who were in a cryogenic sleep. And now they're awake on their little working shift, and they're the ones that are talking to Camille in this instance. And obviously on top of everything, if this isn't some AI voice, they're probably using some voice distortion, but not like anybody would probably recognize what these people sound like anyways, because, it's been like 350 years. But all that aside, let's actually look as well into who the algorithm has actually talked to. We know it talked to Lucas and it stopped him in a tunnel. It talked to the entire Sims family. But I think the real information here and the real secrets are in who the algorithm has told us that it has talked to in the past. Now, that is a Salvador Quinn, George Wilkins, and a Martha Meadows. And yes, Martha Meadows is the same Martha Walker that's down in Mechanical. And apparently she made it to this door years ago and just hasn't said anything about it. But in my opinion, what that does explain is how she knew to manipulate the situation with the tape and the supply chain in order to basically keep Juliette alive. Is probably all part of the plan. Now, I'm not sure who's playing, or maybe it was somebody was just doing her solid, or maybe because she's been down there and talked to the algorithm before, she just knows different pieces of information that others just don't. But did you notice who was actually missing from this VIP list of people who have talked to the algorithm? It's Bernard. And this even further shows that Bernard this entire time was just one big puppet, and that he wasn't protecting anything, and that he was just there as this puppet master, actually been manipulated and controlled himself to get everybody to, basically follow the employee ham. And it's crazy to think that as important as he seemed at the time, when you deduce everything that happened to him, he was basically nothing. He was just as disposable as the people that he tried to get rid of. And now that we've talked about the safeguard, the rebellion, or the attempted rebellion, Juliette coming back, we know the world is actually dead. Where does this leave us in season 3? Well, the first thing I would say, it seems to me like the board has been completely wiped and now we're going to start fresh, to a degree at least. Camille Sims is going to have an interesting path, because is she going to be a dictator that's basically, in my opinion, probably just going to be cold and calculated to really just keep her son alive, maybe her husband too, but definitely keep her son alive. And she may just follow the orders of the algorithm just like Bernard did. Well, I forgot Bernard didn't talk to him. But she may just follow the orders of the algorithm and do whatever it tells her to do to keep this, potential rebellion down. That way nobody's killed by the safeguard. But I do think this is going to drive a wedge between her and her husband, Robert, because, we all know he wants to be the guy to save the day and be the hero. And he's not going to be that in this story. And it seems like for some of the trailer footage that, he's going to be mingling a bit with Juliette. So I'm thinking that he may actually join a rebellion, or at least assist the rebellion to a degree. And we know that they're going to be using amnesia as some type of weapon against Juliette specifically. And in the book, the amnesia is kind of done in the water supply, but this time it seems like they're going to be doing it with the pill. And, we see her with the note that says, don't take the pills or whatnot. But all that aside, I'm sure through all of her flashbacks that she's going to have, and she probably will eventually stop taking the pills, she's going to remember who she is at some point and take an active part in this rebellion. And this is where I kind of think things change, because I don't think this rebellion is going to be them trying to get out by going up. I actually think they're going to go down, because we can't forget about the game changer that is George's secret door. Remember that big, massive steel door that George found? Now, in the book, it's a digger. It digs its way to the next bunker or whatever the case may be. But I think in the show, they're probably going to change a little bit. And it's probably going to be a already finished tunnel system that most people probably don't know about, that's connecting all of the silos, which probably allows people to move throughout them as they choose to, if they know about it. And it won't be hard for this to do, because as we saw from the above shot, all these silos are pretty close to each other, so connecting a tunnel system under them should be pretty easy. And this is where I think the show at some point is going to turn back into a survival thriller, because all of these silos are undoubtedly probably going to team up at some point and try to go after Silo 1. So that is it. That is the complete season 1 and 2 recap with a little bit about season 3. I try to throw in some hidden clues for you to kind of explain everything and where we are and where we're going. Let me know if I missed anything. If you guys caught anything that I missed, let me know. I'm pretty sure I covered most of the big things in it. I didn't go through every little single episode. I didn't want to do that. That would have been entirely too long. But I did want to give everybody a overview of all of the important factors leading into season 3, especially how season 2 ended with the flashback to DC. But thank you all for watching, and thank you for tuning in. Keep coming back for more. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button on your way out, and I will see you in the next one.